I come from the Gapminder Foundation, and our mission has been to always focus on making a fact-based worldview easy to understand for everybody. And that's a pretty bold mission statement, but I think you usually need to have a bold mission statement in order to go somewhere. And when we started, it was a pretty long time ago. We've been working together for 18 years. It was Hans Rosling that was just mentioned, Ola and I. And the reason why I don't put the last names here is because that always looks so ridiculous, because the last name is actually the same. And usually I noticed if I don't put this slide and explain how everything is related, people are like still confused all the time, because most people remember Hans being a very vivid speaker, and then they sit wondering, so who is she? What does she do here? So everything started actually when I was 16, and I met Ola at my high school in Uppsala. At that point, my goal in life was to become an artist. And I can say, coming from a divorced family, I would never, ever imagine that I would, 1, get married, 2, have kids, 3, work with my husband, and 4, work with my father-in-law as well. That was sort of the lowest of the lowest on my life, what I was expecting for my life. But that is what happened. And the reason was because me and Ola, we were both studying arts and stuff. So our goals were never ever to do a career or be successful in like earning money and that kind of things. But what happened was, when I was doing these arts things, I realized that my background is basically both my parents were artists. And I saw my classmates, I was attending National School of Photography in Gothenburg, and I saw my classmates, they were going there because they were so passionate, and they had disappointed parents at home that were hoping they would become something better. But for me, it was sort of the easy choice. So I started feeling that I was missing something, that I didn't do a hard choice. And so I started studying social science in parallel, so I was going back and forth. And I really enjoyed it, but I was a bit frustrated there too. So basically the art scene, there it was that was during the time when it was a lot of performances. It was a lot of like 24 hours uncut, my legs walking, or, you know, that kind of thing. And it's being a comment on gender issues or something. And in the social sciences side, we were reading all these books about people who passed away before the telephone, the asphalt, and etc., and what they were thinking. And I couldn't really get all these together, even though I was interested in both. But then Hans, Ola's father, he was lecturing in medicine and trying to make students understand the global perspectives of the world. And he was so frustrated because he never managed to give them the overview. So he had started crafting some drafts of charts. They were they were somewhat fascinating but pretty ugly. And suddenly there was something, actually both me and Ola, we couldn't really resist starting working on it. For me, it was probably because I could use my visual side, but I could work on something that felt more important and current. And for Ola, it was basically, he was going to write a thesis in economic history, and he hated writing. So he realized, what if he took this chart and made it animating? That would actually give him credit points without writing, and he would learn how to animate because he wanted to apply to the National Art School with something more like video, cartoonish, film-like. So everything started very weird, and for the first 5 years, we had no idea we were working because we were students and we were doing things on the side. And then gradually we started realizing this is a job. And then now we've been doing it for 18 years. So now you know why. So it was never my goal, but this is what happened, right? The confession. So usually what we do is that we start by asking the audience some questions. And since I have so short time, I will just ask you one question today. So just answer very quick on this one. Worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school on average. How many years have women of the same age spent in school? Would you guess 9 years, 6 years, or 3 years? We can start by just raising our hands. How many would say 9 years? A. How many would say B, 6 years? And how many would say C, 3 years? Great. So what we've realized then, we can see the result. A is actually the correct answer. So women have, on average, attended almost as many years as boys in school. But if we look at Swedish population, because we polled the general public, you can see that almost no people in Sweden would actually guess for A. And I would say it was the same in the room here, that we cannot really imagine that it could be so close. In US, we have about similar results, and we've tried the same questions in South Africa and in Canada, and in a lot of audiences like this. And usually we record it, but I didn't do that now. But what the thing is, people are always answering more negative answers than the actual truth. And that is something we have figured out by asking a lot of questions to a lot of audiences. Generally, we think the world is much worse than it actually is. So Ipsos is an organization who were running a poll on the general audience in 17 countries, and they were asking, is the world getting better or worse? And this was the end of 2016. And this is the results. So it's only the Chinese where you can see more people think the world is getting better than worse. Other than that, everybody else thinks it's getting worse. And especially, look at Sweden here. Only 10% of the Swedes that answered this poll thought the world was getting better. But when we look at the results, or when we look at the public data that exists, we can actually see that a lot of things are actually improving. So I'm just going to show that very briefly. On this chart, we can see all the countries of the world. They are colored by the region. So here, for instance, we have the Asian countries, European, African, and Americas. And then on the standing axis, you can see life expectancy. So basically, you're older at the top, and you can expect to become older at the top here in these countries. We can point, for instance, we can point at this country, Japan. In Japan, you can expect to become more 83 years old, while in Central African Republic, you can expect to be about 50. We can look at income on the lower axis, basically saying poorer this end, richer this end. And what we can do now, the size also is the population of that country. So obviously, this is China, India, US, and we can look at Sweden briefly. Let's see if I can, yes. Sometimes I don't manage to point it. So in Sweden, you can expect to become 82 years old, and you see we're at the absolute top here. So what we can do now is that we can play everything over time. So we can go back to 1800. In 1800, you can see most countries were actually down here in this corner, where no country is today. And we can play them over time and just see the general trends. The reason now why the yellow bubbles are moving is because we actually have very good data quality here, while in the others it's more like somewhere here. But then we can see over time how countries are actually improving. That was First World War, and then we have Second World War. But see the general trend, how countries are actually moving to the richer and healthier corner. And especially, watch China, how fast they are. So we can just go back briefly, and we can take China and we can take Sweden, just so we can, and we go back to somewhere here. So until here, the China was not moving very fast. But look now, we just do a repeat here. So just see how fast they are moving. So we can follow countries like this. And we can look also at child mortality rate. Basically, how many kids die before they turn 5 years old per country. And here we can see the opposite trend. We can see in poorer countries, because we have income still on this axis, in the poorer countries, you have higher child mortality, while in the richer, we have lower. But going back here in time, we can see how that has changed. We just played as well, just we can go forward a little bit more. Start here somewhere. See how the countries are actually falling as they become richer, and how child mortality rates are actually changing over time. Pretty dramatic. And I would say this, I would consider being the world getting better, actually having fewer kids dying, as well as life expectancy. It's getting better because people can expect to live longer, basically. So this is what we can do with a lot of these indicators. And most of them actually show that the world is improving. That doesn't mean that everything is good or that everything is getting better, but in general, a lot of things are actually improving over time. So where do people live then? Well, we are 7 billion people in the world. 1 billion live in the Americas, 1 in Europe, 1 in Africa, and 4 lives in Asia. So we can remember the PIN code of the world is 1114. I mean, it's roughly rounded, but this is the only way we can remember, right? So what about the future? In 2050, we expect it to be 1 more billion people in Asia and 1 more billion in Africa. And this is supposed to be, 2,100. Then this is what we're supposed to have. Basically, a population that increases in Africa and Asia, but not in Europe or Americas. But if we split Americas and Europe, we can organize these two like the classical West that we're used to. And we can see in 2100, we will be 8% of the world population. The rest will actually be here. And I think that is pretty important, remembering when we think about the future and how we should understand it. So this is where people live. But if we want to understand how people live, how can we do that? Well, we can use media, can't we? So we see natural disasters, wars, refugees, diseases, minorities doing strange things, paradise beaches, animals, and weird cultures. And then we try to mix all these together to create a worldview. But is it truly correct? No, I don't think so, because everything we see are only the extraordinary things. So I started a project that I call Dollar Street. So what I do here is basically, I would like you to imagine the world as a street. On this street, you have the poorest living to the left and the richest to the right, and everybody else, they live somewhere in between, most in the middle. So on this street, if we think about the world like that, let's change back to the population, the 7 billions. What I've done is that I've asked students when I'm out in high schools and so on, where they think they belong, if we just put the 7 billions on income. So if you ask that in Sweden, Canada, and US, which we had, and in schools, most of us actually belong to this one, the richest billion. So what would the people answer? Most of them think that they are here. So how can you understand the world? You see media images that just shows extraordinary events, and you think that you are in the middle of the world income while you're actually among the 1 billion richest. Pretty hard. So I sent out photographers to homes on different income levels in a lot of different countries. So far, the photographers have been to 50 countries, visiting 264 homes. And in each home, they look at how people sleep, how they cook, and what toys they have. They also look at about 135 other things. So I'm going to show you a little bit what that looks like. It's a live project. I didn't want to end that slideshow, but I did. So here, this is the project. On the top, you see it says families in the world by income. Under that, you see the street, and you see a lot of houses on it. And you see poorer homes to the left and richer to the right. And we actually ordered the families we have visited, not by country, but by income. So we're going to see poorer households to the left and richer to the right. And as I scroll down, we see a lot of different families in different countries. And what we can do now is that we can actually look at, for instance, front doors, like this. I have to stand on my toes, otherwise I can't reach. Now we see the world by front doors. And we can do these visual comparisons by using photos as data to understand what the world is like and to compensate for all the extraordinary images we see in the media. So I think this is the biggest database of well-structured and organized footage from like everyday life. And then we can see the gradual change, what happens with more income. We could, for instance, go and see beds. Of course, this is free for anyone to use and to help upload photos and to download imagery. So just so you know. So here we see the beds. And remember, when I ask people where they think they belong, they usually say that they are in the middle, even though the people I ask are in the richest billion. So then we can do this very neat thing. We can actually filter the street visually to just look at images in the middle. So we do something like this. So here we see bedrooms in the middle income segment. And most people I've met and asked wouldn't say that this is their typical bedroom. Neither they would feel at home here. But here it starts to look pretty familiar. So here we can see bedrooms in China, Netherlands, South Korea, Latvia, France, United States, and so on. Ukraine, Nepal. We can then click at the home like this, and we can go to visit the family. Because sometimes we want to see the context. Where does this bed come from? And then we can learn a little bit about the family, and we can see all the images from that particular home. So this is what we can do, and then we can go back here. Let's say we go for toilets, which is my favorite, because you're never allowed to go and take photos of toilets. Maybe this is the passage from my photo school, you know, side of things, I don't know. So here we see a lot of photos from toilets from all over the world. But remember, we're still in the very richest end on that side. So let's actually increase the span of toilets. And now we will see a more representative image of what toilet actually looks like. So this is the way we can work with this tool. And actually, honestly, after working with data visualization and data storytelling, what I've learned the hard way is that even if you make data visual, doesn't mean that people love data, unfortunately. And even if you make it colorful and moving, doesn't necessarily mean that they love data, because they can still spot that this is charts and so forth. But then I figured, talking especially to school kids or in R&D departments in companies, actually making this kind of imagery is a very good complement, because we can see the world in a richer format that we don't necessarily think of as data, but it is actually structured by income. So, and then we can go back, open the slideshow again. But we do not only take photos in these homes, we also ask a questionnaire, let them answer a questionnaire about things that doesn't fit in a photo, like do they own their homes, how long does it take to fetch water, how often do they have electricity outages and stuff like that. And we also look at everyday functions, so therefore we also take videos of everyday functions. So I'm going to show you a video of toothbrushing, and we're going to start at the top. So here, and the sound, do you have sound? No sound? We have the sound cable. You can imagine the brushing, okay? See here, people are using plastic toothbrushes everywhere. Some are very serious when they brush, but otherwise they do the exact same thing. But when we come down to this poorer end, you will start seeing people are starting to use sticks or even their fingers to brush their teeth. So this woman, for instance, she's in Malawi, and she scrapes some mud from the wall, and then she mixes with water, and then she brushes her teeth. So therefore, in Dollar Street, we tag this image not only as her wall, but also as her toothpaste. Because in poorer areas, you will use the same things for a lot of different functions, while up here, we have a separate thing for everything we do, so to say. So we can segment toothbrushing by saying the poorer, they will use their finger or a stick. Then in the middle, you will see people start using a plastic toothbrush, a very durable and cheap item. And then coming further up the street, people start having one each. And that is very nice, because then you don't have to share with your grandma anymore, and that is usually appreciated. So what we can do then is that we can also look at countries. Here we see the US, and it's the income distribution of US. So basically, and the whole dollar street is on a logarithmic scale, I should say, even though it's a boring statement. But here we see the US income distribution. We can zoom in a little bit. And then here we have a family we have visited, the Howards. And this is their home. And we can also visit a home in the poorer end of the income spectrum of US. And this is the Hadleys. And what we can do now is that we can compare their cutlery drawers. So here we go directly and watch at the cutlery drawers, and we can see a huge difference on different income levels, where the first ones store their cutlery in a green box, while the others have a wooden drawer with small wooden compartments. And especially look at the small extra compartment within the compartments for the very tiny silverware that they also have. We can add another family in the middle, the Robinsons, and we can see the gradual change. See how they are having a wooden drawer as well, but they don't have all the compartments, so they basically mix all the cutlery. We can look at their kitchen sinks and their living rooms, and a lot of other things, of course. We can do the same in China. 3 homes on different income levels, 3 families. We can look at their houses, their sofas, and how they are boiling their water. Usually when we think about how people do it in different countries, we talk about in China they boil their water like this, in China they do this and that. But actually I think it's important to remember that on different income levels we do things very differently. We can also compare 2 countries at a time. So here we have the 2 homes we already seen in China and US on the richer side, the Howards and the Wus. And we can step into their bedrooms and we can see they're pretty much alike, aren't they? They both have brown leather sofas and they have almost identical place structures, and most likely it's because both are made in China, right? So then we can compare on the other end. So we go and add Nigeria, where we haven't seen anything so far. Here we can compare the poorest home in China we saw with the home in Nigeria. Looking at the families, we wouldn't immediately say that they are very similar, but looking at their ceilings, both have a grass roof with a plastic sheet on top. They have similar sofas. They store their grain in similar ways. They're going to have fish for dinner, and they're boiling their water in an identical manner. So a quick recap of that. Let's look at the poorest. I'm going to show you some comparisons where in each comparison we see the same thing looking very similar, even though we are in different regions of the world. Beds in Africa and Asia, ceilings, boiling water. If you have no shoes, and if you eat with your hand, it would look the same in India or Burkina Faso. Storing salt in a plastic bag or using the bush as a latrine, which 1 billion people do, will look the same in Nigeria and Nepal. Going to the middle, a pretty wide group, but here we see people are starting having electric lights. They no longer sleep on the floor. They store their salt in plastic jars. They have more than 1 spoon. They have a lot of pens, but some pens, and they are stored in a box. They have a corrugated iron roof, shoes, phones, toys, and they produce a lot of waste. And at this level, we do start produce waste, but we do not have the perfect system to handle it yet. And in the richest group where we belong, we have shoes, sofas, fruit bowls, hairbrushes, bookshelves, toilet paper. Pretty hard to tell whether you're in Tanzania or Palestine by just sitting here on the toilet. Wardrobes, lamps, black dogs, hardwood floors, soap, washing machines, clocks, computers, and smartphones. So the images we see in media with all these extraordinary events doesn't really match the everyday life of people. So I think in Dollar Street, what we can see here, we can see that people on the other side of the world actually might look a lot like us ourselves, actually, if we are in the same income spectrum. So I would like to, I don't know what about time. I would like to just do a very, very brief ending by just doing something I've never ever done. And it's not going to be very visual, but I would really like to give you a few moments, like 3 minutes or 2 minutes or something, to just talk briefly about how we think about data visualization and data storytelling at Gapminder. So how do you create a Gapminder-like presentation? Doing that in a 2-minute thing might be a little bit rough, but I think we have a few ways of thinking that might be of use for you. Doesn't matter what your data source is, because there are some simple ideas. First of all, you need a lot of data, and you have to spend most of your time actually going through the data and figure out what is worth talking about. And what you can usually do that is very helpful is by starting to ask your audience some questions about the data you are later going to present, because then you can see what they know or what they don't know. Because one of the things we have realized is when you do not make the audience uncomfortable realizing how wrong they are about what the things you're going to talk about, they think that they already know everything you're saying. They're like, yeah, I knew that. But if you have them answer a question about things you're later on going to talk about, they're going to be more humble and more willing to learn. So that is a smart thing. And then base it on data, spend 80% of your time working on the data itself rather than doing a visual presentation. Design, here we are pretty strict, so we dislike basically decoration. Never ever use decoration. Just show the content that you should show and don't hide it. Make it clear, usually by not over-designing it. So try to minimize designing. Text, make the font so big so people at the back end of a big room with like sight disabilities, basically half-blind people, could actually still see what you're doing. Otherwise, usually you see these slides very full of text, basically everything the presenter is going to tell you, and it's usually hard to read because the fonts are so small. So as little text as you can. Sequence, try to make the presentation like a sequence. So basically every single slide should include the point you're currently making and should be clear. And if you can, build up gradually. Remember how I did with the map, with the people? I started by putting 7 billion people out at the bottom, so you saw how many there were. And then by using animation just for things that should animate, so your eye actually follows. It goes from here and it lands there. Basically help people by doing one thing at a time. And usually it feels pretty silly because people are intelligent and you feel stupid doing so childish presentations, but it's usually worth it. Because the audience, this is the sad thing to say, usually they know pretty little about what you're going to talk about, and usually their interest is also pretty limited, and they are not ready to invest in actually learning. So remember that your audience will not be that interested. They will pretend to know everything, and they will pretend to be very interested, but usually they are not. They're just listening with a half ear, and so basically serve that half ear. That's the only thing you can do in a short time. So good luck with that, and thank you. Thanks.